everybody. It's Dave here from Good Morning Gallahorn. And it's Good Morning Gallahorn with Friends. And joining me today, we have a friend of the show, the one and only Matthew Coller. How you doing, Matthew?
What is up, friend? I'm doing great. How about you?
I am doing really, really well. It's a cool day here in Denver. How's it up there in Minnesota?
I mean, it's about as good as we can expect for this time of year. I mean, it's windy still, it's cold, but there's not like 6 feet of snow on the ground. So I guess we're doing okay. I mean, I have to walk the dog either way. So it just depends on how much I bundle up for a particular day.
Well, that's cool. It's Minnesota, you know. I used to live up there
That's
too.
right.
It's that time of year. You expect it. Once you get after Christmas, then it takes the northerly dip into the below zeros. Then it's fun.
Yeah,
Anyway,
and also, I mean, you always get that April or late March storm that has to come too. So even though you feel like, well, we're kind of in the middle of winter, maybe it won't be that bad. It will. It
it
won't
will
be
be.
that bad.
hmm
Yep.
It will be. Um, so, why I wanted you on the show today is you've got a new book out. And that book, for anybody that wants to know, is right here. You can catch it on Amazon. It's called Making of a Miracle, the story behind the improbable 2017 Vikings. And if you look there, you can get it before Christmas, which is always a wonderful thing to do. Tell me about what came to your mind as why you wanted to write this book.
Well, in May, like many other Americans, I lost my job because of COVID cuts. And of course, I launched Purple Insider, the newsletter, along with the podcast. And that's gone really well. And I've been happy with it. And I extend a huge thank you to all the Vikings fans who have supported me after a tough time. But I also started looking for side projects. I mean, what do we have going on here in our lives? I mean, there aren't too many places you can go, can't exactly travel. So the whole summer was basically playing golf and looking back at all of my old notes and having new, fresh conversations with people who were involved in the 2017 season. And the more that I talked to people and the more that I looked back at all of the storylines from that year, I thought, I wonder if people would enjoy a look at all the things that led to the Minneapolis Miracle, because that's the thing that you ultimately take away from that season. But there were so many other things that happened along the way and so many things that had to happen in order for it all to fall into place. I mean, there's the fact that Sam Bradford gets hurt, but there's also things like a long snapper getting injured that leads to a backup long snapper who makes a mistake in the game that ultimately ends up having Stephon Diggs needing to make that play. Right. So
Blocking the wrong way,
there's
yes.
exactly. There are so many. There is a section called the Ballad of Jeff Overbaugh that kind of dives into that. But, there are just so many things from that season. And of course, Philadelphia Eagles fans trolled me with, oh, you write a book about a team that didn't win the Super Bowl. But, I think that when Vikings fans read it back and they see the stories of how the players really came together in the locker room will be another one of the takeaways, aside from, hey, a lot of things had to happen in order for Stephon Diggs to be running down the sideline for a touchdown.
Right. And but that's the story of football as a whole. From growing up as a kid, playing it all the way through, if you're good enough to make the NFL, it's about how things come together and how things work, and it's a story. It's one we share with our families, especially in the North Midwest, North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, all across there. Football's become such a part of our life, and it's those stories that keep us going and keep them coming back for more. If it wasn't for that, we'd all be some other fan, and we're not. We love our Vikings. Which
Yeah,
is
yeah. And when you think about it, there's only 16 games. And you think about the amount of work that goes into those 16 games and how crazy it can be in a small sample, and how if one thing falls a certain way, then you end up with certain results. So a good example of that is Anthony Barr falling on Aaron Rodgers with a little too much of his weight. And that's another section in the book, of course. And, that also shapes the way that season went, because who knows if the Vikings end up 13-3 if Aaron Rodgers plays 2 games, right? Or who knows if the playoffs end up falling the way that they did. You think about the influence of even the week before the Vikings had to play the Saints in the 2017 playoffs, and how things fell so interestingly with Nick Foles throws a pass right to the Atlanta Falcons. It bounces off a guy and his receiver catches it. Julio Jones mistimes a jump. Like, there are so many things in a small sample of just 16 games that can lead to these wild storylines like you're talking about, and the things that people never forget. And it was really fun to dive back into those stories and also put in what I've learned since from some of the players who were there, coaches who were there, about how it all went down.
Well, tell me about some of that. What have you learned since that, helped become key to that season? How did the locker room gel? How did it, stuff like that?
Yeah, I think that, well, 2 things come to mind immediately when you say that is Sam Bradford. I had a chance to talk with him about 2017, and I mean, his career as a Viking as well. And 2 things that really stuck out. I mean, number one was I didn't realize the depth of a relationship that Sam Bradford had built with Mike Zimmer. I think we think of Mike Zimmer as being all defense. He doesn't want to hear from the quarterback unless it's Teddy Bridgewater, maybe, who he loves. But aside from that, it's have somebody else deal with that offense. I am the defensive guy. But what I didn't realize, and what Sam Bradford told me, was that during the OTAs, if you remember, Mike Zimmer was still recovering from his eye injury. During the mini camps and OTAs where he wasn't there, Bradford and Zimmer started talking every day, sending texts to each other, phone calls, watching film, making observations. And they really gelled, because I don't think people realize what an X and O junkie Sam Bradford was. He was always tweaking and tinkering and wanting to learn more about the game, and having his own creativity and ideas to the offense, which I think is one of the reasons he worked so well with Pat Shurmur, because Shurmur was a guy who would listen to the players and their feedback and then try to implement it on the field if he thought it made sense. And that really helped their offense bond together. And so Bradford and Zimmer become close in training camp. There's one point where Bradford jumps into Zimmer as they kind of celebrate a touchdown on a particular play. And, these guys actually became kind of close. And then after the first week, leading up to it, actually in that first week, Zimmer and Bradford sat down together, and he showed Bradford all the things that the Saints defense was going to do to him. And Bradford felt that really helped him in that week 1 game that everybody remembers, where he was incredible. And so you wonder about how a season would have gone of Zimmer helping him understand the defenses better. He said he had never had a coach that he did that with before. And it was really a game changer for him for game planning and understanding how he was going to be attacked. And then the other part of it is, if you sit there and wonder, gosh, what if Bradford had been the quarterback the whole season? So does he. And he said that as well. He said that he thinks about it all the time, just about how good that started and how frustrating it was for the injury to happen.
Well, in my opinion, Sam Bradford is one of the most talented quarterbacks we've ever seen when it comes to his mind and his arm. He was unbelievable. It's unfortunate that he had the injury issues that he did and basically destroyed his knees. It's not unfortunate that Aaron Rodgers had the weak collarbone, but hey, I'll take it. Now, I do wish Sam Bradford would have stayed healthy. I think we would have probably gone the entire way. But Sam Bradford was one of the 3 quarterbacks that we talked about during 2017. Tell us about Case Keenum.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Keenum, I spent a lot of time in 2017 and then even more since researching about why Case Keenum was passed on in the draft and how everyone could miss that this guy could lead a 13-3 team. Now, I know since then, Case Keenum has not become a franchise quarterback. He's been more of a backup, and his 1 season looks like an anomaly. Still, this was a guy that was undrafted, and if you go through that draft where everyone passed on Case Keenum, he's one of the better ones Cousins that comes out of the draft. There were a lot of big armed quarterbacks. There were a lot of better athletes that were taken, but there's something to be said for Case Keenum's nature of being aggressive and his personality, his leadership ability, and the fact that he's just got a lot of guts. And throughout that season, Zimmer was terrified by it at times when he threw a couple of interceptions against Washington. And Zimmer was, I'm sure, always having nightmares about that next Case Keenum interception, which in the miracle game, he throws a bad interception. And you could just sense that Mike Zimmer was like, that's the one I knew was coming, because Case was always taking a lot more risks than Zimmer wanted him to. But at the same time, it's an interesting study to always look at someone who goes undrafted, especially with the numbers he put up in college, and say, what did the NFL miss about Case Keenum? And I think the number one thing that they missed was how much of an impact his personality and his willingness to be out there and play gutsy and take those risks, how much that would work with a locker room that was already gelling and with receivers who could make plays when you took those risks. And it just was one of those situations where it fell perfectly into place with his personality, what he could do, what he was capable of, his playing style, and then the two guys at wide receiver who would always make him right, or mostly make him right, when he took a risk.
It was that YOLO style of his where he would heave it up. I was at that Washington game, and that ball where he just lobbed up and Thielen caught it was just amazing. And being at that game with half the fans being Vikings fans and the Skol chant going, it was wonderful. Got a question for you. Was the locker room chemistry changed when the Vikings moved from Sam, Teddy, Case after 2000 and went with Kirk?
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely was, but it wasn't just because of Kirk Cousins. I think that it's easy to draw that connection and say, well, Kirk showed up with his huge contract and he is not known as being the leadership type of guy that Case Keenum or Teddy Bridgewater was. So that's why things fell apart. But if you also look at some of the other key players that left, I mean, Teddy Bridgewater played a huge role in that locker room throughout that season. Adam Thielen told me that Teddy was helping him better understand what the quarterback was seeing. In that same Washington game, there's a play where Teddy Bridgewater goes over to Case Keenum and says, I'm seeing this with the way that the Washington defense is playing you, and so you should try it. And it turns into a big play later in the game. And so personalities like Teddy's and like Terrence Newman's and Brian Robinson, those guys really brought people together, but they taught each other. They helped each other. They assisted each other. And I think when they lost those guys who were really the main voices in the locker room, it wasn't just Case, it wasn't just Terrence, it wasn't just B-Rob, it was all of them exiting when Kirk came in. I think that made a difference. And then the other part of it too was Pat Shurmur. I mean, you have to wonder in 2018 if Pat Shurmur does not take the Giants job and he runs the same offense that he was running before, only with Kirk Cousins. Well, we've seen that Kirk, when he's doing the play action type of stuff and when they are more of a run first offense, that maximizes Kirk Cousins. And so he didn't perform that well that first year. And I think it became kind of easy to say like, oh, it's Kirk. He's the reason why the chemistry is not the same. But when you have Super Bowl expectations and you go 8-7-1 and you fire an offensive coordinator, everybody does start looking around and pointing fingers. I mean, that's just how it goes. The 2016 locker room was kind of similar. They were frustrated with Zimmer that year, and there was finger pointing between the offense and the defense. You know, the defense saying, hey, we're doing our job, you're not doing your job. And then the next year, it comes all together, it gels. But at the same time, winning plays a huge role in that. So I think that Cousins does not have the same type of personality that Case Keenum does. Keenum and Bridgewater and Bradford, I think those guys were they related to other players better. I don't want to say that there's a difference in genuineness because that's hard for me to say. That would have to be the players and their own personal feelings on that. But I think that Cousins has a very different personality and doesn't connect on a personal level the same way that Teddy Bridgewater does. I'll give you a quick example. Teddy Bridgewater, that same season in 2017, he had a corner of the locker room that he kind of owned, that everybody knew was Teddy's neighborhood. And he invited one of the rookie players over who was from Miami, Stacy Coley, who didn't do a whole lot as a Viking, but he was on the other side of the locker room where kind of the practice squad guys are, the rookies are. And he said, hey, come over and hang out with us. And that was kind of Teddy, like that he would treat the 53rd guy on the roster the same way as the first. And then Cousins comes in and he would, say things in press conferences that sounded like he was the coach or he was part of the coaching staff. And he didn't know all these guys either. You think about how the 2017 team is built. It's these guys all starting at kind of the same point and all growing together. They know each other as people. And then it's sort of like if you are a kid and you go to a new school and then they say, oh yeah, but you're class president. That's kind of how it was for Kirk Cousins. So I think it's a difference in personality, but it's also circumstance that played into that perception.
That makes sense. Makes sense. And I think as we move on now into the 2020 season, that the personalities and then getting rid of key players is affecting us this season as well. Not only on the defense, which is not anywhere near as what it was in 2017. In 2017, it was stellar. This year, we're just trying to get to the average. It affects. Now, looking at 2020, what do you think of the season so far? The Vikings are 500. Do they stay that way? Do they get better? Do they get worse?
First, I want to talk about what you just said about how this year is interesting and how it relates to 2017. The fact that those players who had been together for so long, that so many of them left, kind of marked the end of the era. I had a discussion with someone about whether I should write a book on 2017 when it wasn't that long ago, right? It's like, what was the number one song in 2017? Like, I don't know. I probably remember it pretty well, right?
Right.
But at the same time, this offseason marked kind of the end of that era, which starts in 2014 and really kind of bleeds into Harrison Smith and Xavier Rhodes and Kyle Rudolph and guys like that being drafted a little bit before. So you could even extend it to maybe 2012 to 2017.
Yeah,
everybody,
Griffin. Yep.
Right. And then everybody through 2019, everyone who was on the defense against San Francisco in the playoffs was on the defense in 2015. So that's very rare to have almost no turnover. So then this offseason happens. You lose a lot of those key players, and for good reason. I mean, a lot of them were making huge dollars and were not performing at the same levels that they had been before. So I'm not saying it was the wrong move, but this had to be a transition year to kick off kind of a new era. And what's interesting is you keep the same coach, but he kind of hits the refresh button. And so you end up with Mike Zimmer in a COVID year trying to teach the same way that Mike Zimmer has taught before, and now trying to game plan and scheme and understand all these new players. And it also gives an opportunity, I think, to form these new bonds that down the road will end up as what we saw before, or at least that would be their plan. That would be their hope. I do think that a lot of things had to fall into place to build a roster as strong as 2017, and that will be tough to do again, especially when you're working with a big quarterback contract. But at the same time, it's kind of been a fascinating year from that perspective to see and games where we're asking, is he making progress? Is this guy going to be a star? We don't know. Before we knew who could play. We knew who the guys were, and it was just whether they came to play that particular week or not. But that's been fascinating about this year. Now, how it turns out, I mean, I've said strap into the roller coaster and just ride along because every game has been kind of wild. And look, whether it's the 7 seed or you miss the playoffs by one game, it probably doesn't impact what's going to happen in terms of offseason or draft or free agency. It's probably going to be about the same plan. And they think that they're going to win in 2021. So let's just see what happens. I mean, I don't think it's a Super Bowl team now, but you can see the bones starting to form of a team that could be very good down the road.
Yeah, I could buy that. You got young stars or young people that could be stars, Dantzler, Gladney, to name a couple, rookies. Of course, Justin Jefferson on the offensive side has just been amazing as a rookie. That could solidify, and you could have something. But I agree with you on the roller coaster. Vikings are notorious, and I've been watching them for eons, notorious for playing down to their opponents or playing up to their opponents And we know players can play extremely well. Kirk Cousins himself has a very high ceiling and very low lows. And you don't know what's going to happen. This week, we play Tampa Bay, Tom Brady, and all that talent down there. And it's probably the biggest test of the season so far, minus, a few of those early games. We, as a fan, we just don't know which team's going to show up. Which team do you think's going to show up? The good one that plays right up there, or the one that gets smoked, comes in flat?
I think it might be somewhere in between. Because Eric Hendricks is out, I have a tough time picking the Vikings for this game. I mean, he is the heart and soul of the defense. I can't imagine where they would be if he wasn't there all season long. He's played at an all-pro level. Pro Football Focus has him as the best cover linebacker in the league, and from watching every snap, I can't disagree with that. I mean, he eliminates the middle of the field. Unlike almost any other linebacker. You think about like a Bobby Wagner when he's at his best, or when Luke Kuechly was in the league. I mean, these guys just took away all the tight ends and running backs who were trying to dominate the middle of the field. And so the drop off from Eric Kendricks to Todd Davis, with respect to Todd Davis for having an NFL career, but I mean, that's massive, right? That's just,
Right.
That's not even debatable. So that's a huge factor for me, is the fact that they're going in there beat up. They're going in there with a backup linebacker. And now Tampa Bay can game plan for the backup linebacker. Unlike Jacksonville, who seem to adjust on the fly and start throwing to tight ends all the time, you can plan to throw to Rob Gronkowski. So I don't think they're as strong of a roster without Kendricks, but I also think that they have such big play potential on the offensive side that they're never out of any game. And we've seen that the last 2 weeks. They get down double digits and then just say, hey, maybe we'll throw it to Justin Jefferson all the time. And it works because nobody can guard Justin Jefferson. And there's a part of me that thinks maybe you should start the game acting like you're down 2 scores and throw to Justin Jefferson all the time. But I don't think that they're quite strong enough to beat a team like Tampa Bay. But like you said, it would not surprise me, because the high end of this team is big time players making big time plays. And that even goes for who's left on the defense. We haven't seen Anthony Harris get interceptions this year, but that wouldn't shock me if that comes at some point. Harrison Smith makes big plays at big times. And then we even saw last week that Cam Dantzler has that in his repertoire as well. And Tampa Bay is also a fickle beast, man. I don't know how to put a finger on them, right? Like, they have some games where they no show and some games where they dominate. And, so part of this is which version of Tampa Bay shows up as much as which version of the Vikings.
Show up. Yeah, it should be interesting. And I look forward to watching it. And of course, I will be on live afterwards with GMG and the Raw. I want to thank you for joining me this morning and talking your book. Also, I wanted to talk about Purple Insider. Purple Insider is where people can see your stuff, both written and in podcast form. Tell us about it.
Yeah, that's right. So after my radio station essentially imploded due to COVID.
Yeah, fired everybody except for 3 people. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, whatever way you want to put it. I decided, look, I don't want to get off this roller coaster, right? I mean, another part of it was I have to give a ton of credit to the Minnesota Vikings and their public relations staff, who's always treated me incredibly well. And they said to me, hey, you can keep your credential. You can stay inside the locker room when we can get inside the locker room again, when this is all over and we're all
I know you miss that
or whatever. I do. I really do. I like the 2017 book. It really made me nostalgic for even being back in the locker room as opposed to Zoom calls, because you learn so much from just being around these guys. You get a feel for their personality. You get to know them on a personal level, as opposed to just being a box and a talking head at them throwing questions. You can get to understand kind of who they are at a much deeper level. So I hope that in 2021 we're back doing that. But the public relations saying, hey, if you continue to cover the team, even if it's your own website or whatever, you could still have all the access, be in the press box for games and on all the Zoom calls and everything else. I thought, well, this is something I've got to try. At least I've got to give it a shot. And so I started a Substack, which now it feels like everybody's on Substack. But I started the Purple Insider Substack and the Purple Insider podcast to do it just like my old show, where I'm interviewing people like ESPN's Courtney Cronin, Jeremiah Searles, former Viking, is on. Those two are both weekly guests. And then other people like Bill Barnwell from ESPN or Robert Mays from The Athletic, they drop by from time to time, and other beat reporters as well, who have been incredibly supportive of what I've been doing. I mean, we're in competition in some ways, but let me use little finger quotes for that because I've just gotten so much support from all the other beat reporters here that it's been incredible. And then Vikings fans jumped on board and they signed up. And since then, I've basically just been doing the same thing that I always did, covering the team, writing articles, doing podcasts. And I've been able to continue it as my full-time job, basically because of the support of all of those people.
Will you be able to travel at all this year? Or are you just locked in sitting out there on the porch in your office?
It has made me sad to not be able to travel this year, and that's not because of what my outlet is. It's just because of COVID. I mean, they're really, yeah, you don't get anything out of traveling. I mean, if I went to the Tampa Bay game, I would be there in the press box, but we would just be on Zoom calls like this after the game, which I can be from my house. So is the observations I can make about, somebody standing on the sideline or not, is that worth traveling, the risk that you take with traveling and so forth? And it just sort of speaks to, I can't wait till our world gets back to normal, because then Purple Insider will absolutely be on the road. I'll probably pick 4 games out of the schedule in each year and say, I'm absolutely going to, of course, Chicago. You got to go see whatever's going to happen there, because you never do know, right? And Lambeau is going to be a must every year, and then we'll see. I'll probably pick a couple other games, but yeah, definitely in the future plans. Just unfortunately, unless they make the Super Bowl, then I will find a way to go to the Super Bowl.
Well, that would be something, and it is 2020, and anything.
It is, right?
Anything can happen. Well, I wanted to put up here your products, Purple Insider and Making of a Miracle. Making of a Miracle is on sale. Purple Insider always on sale. Making of a Miracle on sale at Amazon. You can go get that. Have it to your favorite Vikings fan, especially any Viking historian, for Christmas. I know people are running late on Christmas presents, me being one of them. It's a good idea. What else have you got coming up this weekend? You're obviously going to cover from afar, like everybody else, the game. Anything else in the near future?
Well, yeah, I'm not ready to announce it yet, but there is another book that's already starting in the works that surrounds the Vikings, and I'm pretty excited about that. I'm already going to start working on. And other than that, I mean, what I'm really interested in is, aside from the way this season plays out, which of course you never know. And like you said, it's 2020. And if they ended up in the Super Bowl, like, this would be the perfect year for the Vikings to end up in the Super Bowl, when everything goes awry and, maybe somebody starting quarterback gets COVID or something before the game and the Vikings go to the Super Bowl. Yeah, I'm also joining on a regular basis Chris Trapasso of CBS Sports on a draft podcast too that he's doing called The Prospect, and that's launching I think next week or in a couple of weeks here. So I'm already starting to do my draft research, because I know that Vikings fans are crazy about draft night. And so I can't wait to dive into all of that stuff. It's fun to see every Friday mailbag that I do. Half the questions are about the game that's coming up, and half the questions are about, hey, who are they getting rid of in the offseason? Because a lot of fans, I think, right. Yes, exactly. A lot of fans enjoy the offseason as much as they do the regular season, which is great for me, because I do too.
Well, at Climbing the Pocket Network, we've already started a series with some of our draft guys that piggybacks the Skull Search, and we're looking at guys ahead of time. And with Good Morning Gallahorn, we have gone live the last 2 drafts, simul streaming with ESPN and NFL Network and stuff like that, giving an alternative and from a Vikings fan perspective of the draft. Last year we were on for 17 and a half hours straight, and it's by far our biggest viewed
It's great.
series. I mean, we got thousands of people, and they turned volume down on ESPN, and they listen to us. It's fun. We have a great time, and we very much look forward to that. And we'll use you and your new podcast partner as prep as we go into that. I want to thank you for joining me today. This is day 12 of Vlogmas. Vlogmas is where we're doing a live show every day of December. And you are now part of GMG and Friends. And like I said, I want to thank you kindly for that. Any last words?
Well, I just appreciate all of your support and all the support of Vikings fans. Like I said, I couldn't continue to do this job covering the Vikings beat if not for the incredible support of Vikings fans. And I didn't grow up in Minnesota, but the way that Vikings fans and people in Minnesota have treated me as one of them has been amazing. So I greatly appreciate it.
Cool. And for Sunday, go Vikings! Skol! Thank you for watching or listening. As always, if you like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. And if you're listening to the podcast, please rate us on your favorite aggregator. Skol, everybody.